So we're on chapter 32. So this is a chapter written by Russell, okay? So the vocabulary is a little bit different. Lots of times he says brain, where I would say mind, okay? So I may stop and, read what he said and then just give a more Buddhist interpretation of it. Because in Buddhism, we say the mind and the brain depend on each other, but they're quite different because the brain is a physical organ and the mind is something that is not made out of atoms and molecules, and we can't really investigate it by scientific instruments because it isn't the kind of thing that scientific instruments investigate. Okay? So this chapter is about working with judgment and partiality. So I know none of you have that problem. I certainly don't have it. So we're going to talk about this for all the other people who are judgmental, who are partial, who are biased, who are racist, but none of us are. Okay, so once we have that settled, then we can all listen because nobody is attacking us. Okay, so he starts out with a sentence that just contradicts with what I said, but what to do? So he says, it can be shocking to recognize how biased we can be. What? Me? No, not me. We assign labels at lightning speed: friend, enemy, smart, idiot, and several more which are not printed in the book. Once applied, these labels stick in our minds, shaping our future interactions with other people. When we notice we're doing this, rather than assigning more labels by shaming ourselves and saying, I'm so judgmental and short-sighted, and getting into this whole self-blame trip, instead of doing that, we can consider why this happens and what we can do about it. Okay, so from an evolutionary perspective, so this is nice what's coming because it validates why we are judgmental and partial. It makes sense because we are you'll see the argument that evolutionary biologists give. It's so much more comforting, than Buddhists who say it's in your mind. He says it's hardwired. Okay, so from an evolutionary perspective, there are good reasons for quickly assigning the labels friend or foe, safe or threat. For millions of years, our ancestors lived in a world where their survival often depended upon their ability to quickly identify and respond to threats, and their brains evolved to help them cope with such an environment, to fight when they needed to fight, to flee when they needed to flee, and to band together for protection. Okay, so that is speaking very much to us as embodied beings from an evolutionary perspective where our body evolved, okay? In Buddhism, so much of what we're doing is actually trying to go against that. Yeah, we're going upstream because although our ancestors may have needed these kind of protections, from a Buddhist perspective, they stem from ignorance and self-grasping that leads to attachment, and attachment to our body, which leads to anger at anybody who is going to interrupt our happiness or endanger our body. So it's not, Buddhism is not saying, oh, don't care about your life, throw it away. That's not what's happening. But it's just saying that we're trying to go beyond the physical limitations that having this kind of body puts on us. Yeah, because this kind of body does present some limitations, doesn't it? Yeah, and this body causes suffering. There's no two ways around it. So we're not criticizing the body. We're just trying to see it for what it is, so we can take care of it, keep it healthy as the basis of our Dharma practice, but not get too wrapped up and overly concerned with it. Okay, so assigning labels and putting people in categories happens very quickly, frequently occurring without our being consciously aware that we're doing it. Often, we don't thoughtfully consider someone's background and characteristics before deciding how we feel about them. This is very true, isn't it? We look at somebody, and depending on all sorts of external features, we make a judgment about who they are internally as a human being. And that isn't really fair. And not only being not fair, it isn't accurate. It leaves us open to making all sorts of incorrect judgments, okay? Which is another reason not to totally trust that biological part of us, yeah? Because it can make emotions come up that blind us to the reality of the situation. Okay? So instead, we just find ourselves reacting emotionally to their presence with attraction, aversion, wariness, or trust. And you can see that, you're standing in a line somewhere and you look around at the people and we're forming opinions about them all the time. Somebody who looks disheveled must be very uncouth. Yeah. So you look at Boris Johnson and, that's what you think. Of course, I don't know how true or untrue that is. Yeah. But we judge right away. We judge people by their sex, by their gender, by their race, by their height, by their age. Yeah. And we think we know everything about them. We judge them by their hair color. We judge them by how their hair looks. Yeah. We judge them by the wrinkles on their face. It's just incredible. And we think that gives us accurate information about who they are and whether to trust them or not. Okay? And so, the people who look like us, well, on the basis of looking like us, they must be trustworthy. Okay? So-and-so is trustworthy because they look like me in some way or another. Okay? Now, is there pervasion to that syllogism that everybody who looks like me is automatically trustworthy? Hardly. And yet, we believe that syllogism, somebody looks like me, oh, they must be trustworthy, it's good. It's not true, is it? Yeah. I wonder, if we sat down and thought about the people who have harmed us in our life, I bet you we've been harmed more by people who look like us than people who don't look like us. Yeah. Interesting. But of course, somebody can look like us in one way and not look like us in another way. So we also have gradations of looking like us, and then that has to fall in also with our self-opinion. and our self-judgment, which also isn't so accurate. Yeah. Because when I used to fly on planes up until a few months ago, when I go through TSA, every once in a while, somebody would say, "Oh, the people who are over 75, you don't need to take your shoes off." What are you talking about? I'm in my early 30s. Yeah. What are you saying, people over 75? I am not a senior citizen. Yeah. I never received an AARP. What is AARP? Membership card. Yeah. And if I did, I threw it away because it just doesn't apply to me. Yeah. Until my legs stop working. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, what is this about? Doctor said I had arthritis. Doctor's wrong. Yeah, I don't have arthritis. He's just making it up, even though he looks like me. Well, he's a man. That's why he did it. Yeah. So it's so interesting, on what criteria we judge people. Yeah. And how often we're totally wrong about ourselves as well as them. Once applied, these labels are very powerful, shaping how we feel about people, how we interpret their behavior, and how we treat them. To complicate this, our initial labeling process often has a lot more to do with our own histories than it does with the person who's being labeled. Okay, because our evolved brains work in this better safe than sorry sort of way, I would say because of our previous conditioning, our minds work in this way, but it's okay. Our minds, our brains, whatever you want, are always storing information about threats, which will help us to be even more efficient in detecting them in a future. So if we've had a nasty experience with a person who has certain characteristics, say political affiliation, religion, age, sex, gender, or race, we will tend to associate these characteristics with nasty experiences. This is tricky because later we can find ourselves re-experiencing the negative emotions we felt during those initial experiences when we encounter others who happen to share that same characteristic. Okay, so if you were beaten up on the playground, by somebody who looked a certain way when you were a kid, then every time you saw somebody that reminded you of that bully who beat you up on the playground, you automatically go into hyper-vigilant mode and, anticipating that there's a threat there when all the other person has done is walked into the room. Yeah. Have you ever observed your mind doing that with people? Yeah. Just kind of meeting somebody and automatically we judge them. Yeah, I'm not going near that person. We've never even spoken to them. We know nothing about their background, nothing about them. But they remind us of something in the past, and we've so hardened that previous experience that it becomes a filter through which we see everybody now. And the people who somehow match that filter, boom, like this, were like defensive. Yeah? Okay, so our minds are not so reliable. Yeah, they're all we have to rely on, but we have to realize that sometimes they are not so reliable. Okay, so this can be particularly powerful, re-experiencing the initial negative emotion when we see somebody who reminds us of that person. This can be particularly powerful when we've had very few positive experiences with people who have those characteristics. The next time we encounter someone like that, our brains, our minds, automatically bring up the negative emotion we've learned to associate with the characteristic they share, and we experience that we don't like them. Yeah, because they remind us of somebody who did something to us in the past. In this way, we can end up having negative reactions to others who, without our awareness or theirs, innocently trigger previously learned emotional responses in us that have nothing to do with this person we're interacting with right now. So based on past conditioning, we're confusing the present person with the previous person and generating the same emotional reaction towards them. Yeah. And so we do that, and the other person is the recipient of our prejudiced, behavior. And they're wondering, what did I do wrong? Why is this person treating me like this? Yeah. And often the other person doesn't even understand it either because they've just lived their life in this way. Yeah. And so we wind up, eliminating other people from our life. And other people wind up wondering what's going on with us. And sometimes we're in the opposite role. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody's reacted to you in a very strange way, and you've had no previous interaction with them at all? But maybe what's going on in their mind is you remind them of somebody that they had a bad experience with in the past. And so they project all that onto you. And then we're sitting there going, huh? Yeah, you had that experience? It's like, why is this person treating me like, why are they ignoring me? Anyway, you may have had an experience like this, meeting someone and immediately liking or not liking her, even though you don't know anything about her. We may have had that experience. I think we have a lot. Yeah. Or perhaps you found yourself having a great conversation with someone until you discover that they are of this political persuasion or that religion, and immediately their stock falls in your mind. And then you wind up coming out with a phrase like we have, oh, you're such a nice person for somebody who's you're such an intelligent person for somebody who's and that comes out really bad, really bad. But, our mind just is like, yeah. Okay, I said our mind. I didn't mean our mind because we don't do that, right? We're fair, equitable. We never project anything on other people. Yeah, except just maybe 1 or 2,000. Okay, so this is why we want to make sure to create many more positive interactions than negative interactions with others, because the emotional tone of our previous interactions with them will shape how we feel about them in the present. If we have a history of many negative interactions with someone and few positive ones, we can find ourselves experiencing negative emotions that are prompted by their very presence, regardless of their current behavior or intentions. I, Russell, have worked with a number of couples and parents who have had this play out in their relationship with their partners and children, and it can be a tricky business. So I heard about this playing out in a monastery, and it actually involved one of my friends. So she was living at a monastery. She was Polish, and she had been in Poland during World War II. Yeah, she's deceased now, but, so she was older. She had been in Poland during World War II when Poland was occupied by the Nazis. If you know anything about history, the Nazis did not treat the Poles very well, and it was incredible hardship time for the Poles because they had the pressure from the Nazis on one side and the pressure from the Soviets on the other side, and they were stuck in the middle. Okay, so she's at this monastery with a monk who is German. Yeah, and the two of them are like this, And another one of my friends was going there, and he did mediation. So he did a mediation between the two of them because it was really affecting the whole monastery, And what came out of it was, because he was German, in her eyes, everything he did was suspect and wrong because of her previous experience. And she hadn't recognized that about herself. And of course, he was unaware of it, wondering what's going on here. Yeah. But once that came out, then I think they were able to get along a lot better and separate your past experiences from what's happening in the present. Okay, so this is the same dynamic. When we study the conceptual mind and how the conceptual mind takes elements of something and combines them together to make a generalized image of someone or something. Okay, so that's what was happening in the case of my friend who was Polish. And it's also, what we do and, bring these things together and then project them out on other people. And it happens also in our meditation, which is why we can start a meditation out, on our meditation subject. And then we start thinking of somebody who is not here, who maybe is still not alive, but we start getting so upset thinking about them. So it's the same thing of forming a conceptual appearance based on previous data and then making it as if it is happening in the present. And you can spend a whole meditation session furious at somebody who is not here. Yeah, or upset and crying about something someone did to you 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago because of the way the conceptual mind creates this kind of image. So it's the same kind of dynamic, this whole thing. And conceptual minds can be useful in some contexts, and they can be completely unreliable and off base in other contexts. Okay. This is a natural process that plays out in our brains. It's simply how they work in their attempts to help us create an understanding of reality. oh, then that means I'm not a bad person. It just means my brain's doing what they automatically do. Okay, but actually underneath it, I'm guilty. Okay, so let's get rid of all of that stuff too. That's not what we're talking about. When faced with a situation, our minds automatically draw upon our previous experience, reflected in previously formed connections between patterns of cells in the brain. It's the brain's attempt to help us efficiently make sense of what is happening so we don't constantly have to relearn everything. But sometimes we learn things in the wrong way, don't we? Yeah. When new information comes in through our senses, it activates brain patterns associated with that previous learning. The librarian of our brains goes about collecting previously stored information that seems relevant to the situation at hand, piecing it together into an experience of reality. How can something made of atoms and molecules do that? Okay. In new information, the new information coming in and the old information we've stored in the past are woven together to create an experience in the present. Often we're not conscious of this process at all. We just find ourselves in the situation, feeling a certain way about it, having certain thoughts, but unaware that these feelings and thoughts are echoes of previous conditioning experiences that may have little to do with what is happening right now. Okay? I read an article this morning. It was talking about how people, it was written by, I think, some psychologists, how people are reacting to things about the pandemic, yeah, and how they're dealing with cognitive dissonance. So we learn something, yeah, and we invest our time and energy in it, but then we get new information that contradicts what we've learned. Okay? If what we learned before was very superficial, we may look at the new information and reassess and form a new opinion if the new information contradicts the old one. But if we're very invested in the old information, we've put a lot of time into cultivating a certain view, a certain opinion. We have a group of friends who agree with us about that. We firmly believe in this over a long period of time. Then when new information comes that contradicts our position, there's an experience of cognitive dissonance. So what do we do if it's something that's a really entrenched learning? Is we try and change the new information so that it actually winds up corroborating what we already believe. We reinterpret the new information, so that it agrees with our previous condition. And the guy who was writing the article, he gave the example. I don't know if some of you may have seen there was a video of some people in southern Florida going to talk to people in their county who had a mandate about wearing a mask. This was a few weeks ago. And those people went in and they were furious. And they were saying, people are getting killed because of wearing a mask, And the mask, because the mask holds in the germs or the mask does something. And people are getting killed because of it. And my freedom is more important than this. And you're destroying my freedom. So, and then people were saying other things, one more astounding to me than the next. But what they were trying to do was either take the new information and twist it so it conforms to what they believe, or show how the new information is so totally wrong, and perverted, like, you're taking my rights away. I have a constitutional right to choose my own health, whether I wear a mask or not. And, and so completely shoving that opinion aside. So it's very interesting, And I was thinking this is also what happens sometimes in situations of scandals, like when the Catholic Church had those scandals, then it was so hard on people who really had faith in the church and faith in the priests. How do they reconcile this new information of people being, sexually abusing altar boys? Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance. Yeah, and so it becomes very, very difficult. So you either find some way of throwing that new information out and saying, it's totally wrong, it can't happen, they've taken this vow, they would never act like that. And so you completely reject the new information. Or you take the new information and you twist it so that it conforms to what you already believe. So they weren't actually sexually molesting these children. They were maybe just tapping them on the shoulder and the child misinterpreted it. Okay? So you twist it to explain what you already believe. So this is how our mind works. Yeah, and if you do research back and back and back, you can see it all comes from the misconception of I, and how I always have to be right, I am never wrong, I have to protect myself from anything that could damage my reputation or anything like that. So it's all this mechanism to keep this idea of an I that's the center of the universe and inherently existent, to keep that idea of I intact. Yeah. And what's so bizarre about all these machinations we go through to do that is that such an I that we're trying to protect does not even exist. Yeah? So it's like, somebody criticizing the boogeyman, and you start defending the boogeyman. Yeah? Instead, the boogeyman doesn't even exist. Yeah, there's this beautiful quote from one of the sutras where the Buddha is asking, one of his disciples, what do you think about a monk who dreamt about this beautiful woman and then starts thinking about the foul aspects of the woman he dreamt about, and the fact that she's impermanent, and the fact that the pleasure, from being with her is going to bring a lot of problems. What do you think about a monk who is doing that? And this monk said, that monk's being really foolish, because a dream woman doesn't even exist. So why are you, meditating on her body being foul and the pleasure not being actual pleasure and the whole thing being impermanent when there's no such thing there to start with? I was like, whoa, that story really. So this is why realizing emptiness is important. And even if we can't realize it, at least getting some sense, that questions what we perceive, and if things really exist the way we perceive them to. Mm-hmm. Okay. Once we've unconsciously attached an emotional label to another person or someone they resemble, it will tend to bias how we experience them in the future. So if we like someone, we're more likely to see their positive qualities and ignore or not even notice their negative qualities. If we've labeled someone as a threat or an enemy, we'll be biased in the opposite direction. Since we are caught in this difficult process, we can have compassion for ourselves when these biased emotions arise in us, even as we work to identify and change them. So what he's saying here is don't judge yourself when you discover that you have biased opinions or you're prejudiced or whatever. You can have compassion for this process of just incorrect learning and, old conditioning. And at the same time, try to identify what those things are and recondition ourselves in another way. Okay? So don't insert the thing of what a bad person I am. And I would say also in this climate of cancel culture and so on, don't let somebody else put a lot of labels on you either. Yeah, because I think there's just a profusion of unnecessary labels going around that can make it very difficult for somebody to actually understand a meaning that they could understand if you don't use a particular term. Yeah? Okay. But compassion isn't about making excuses. Okay. Oh, wait a minute, I skipped a sentence. So this can also help us feel compassion for those who are being hostile towards us, knowing their reactions may have little to do with us and much to do with their previous conditioning. But compassion isn't about making excuses. So it's not like, oh, my previous conditioning made me be like this, so that explains it all, and that's just the way I am. No, that doesn't work, okay? Fortunately, we don't have to be controlled by our emotions. Now that we're aware of how they work, we can prepare ourselves and plan for how we want to react. So to keep in mind that how we react to things is not a foregone conclusion. We always have choice, and we can recondition ourselves to respond in different ways that we have come to see as more beneficial and more realistic than the old ways. So we don't stay stuck in our old habits. Okay. When we experience a lack of compassion towards someone, it's often because we've attached a label to him with a corresponding emotion in tow. Seeing someone as that idiot that sabotaged my plans, okay, talk about labels, we feel anger towards him. In such cases, our attention is focused on a very small sample of that other person's characteristics, like the quirky things they do that irritate us, that have nothing to do with, him sabotaging our plans, but, we make it be completely unaware of this person as a complex being like us with many other aspects to his or her life. Reducing other people to a caricature or a cartoon image Yeah? We make them into simply someone to hate. And that's so convenient, isn't it? This person, is totally wrong, bad, always. I hate them. They're responsible for all my suffering. And now, I don't really have to do anything. I can sit there and stew in my anger and blame them. Okay? And so that mechanism, it doesn't work if we want to be happy. Yeah. It can enable a feeling of self-righteousness. I have every right to have a pity party because look what that person did to me. Yeah. And, and we may stake out our rights for our pity party, but is having a pity party really fun? Is getting angry at somebody fun? If we look at it that way, then, when we see that we're projecting stuff onto people that has everything to do with our conditioning and very little to do with them, then really, even for our own benefit, our own peace of mind, it's something we want to work on and, recondition ourselves about. Okay, so the danger in reducing people to a caricature is evident. It makes it much easier for us to behave harmfully or harbor grudges towards a person when we fail to recognize his or her essential humanity. We need to find a way to see others as they really are, as complex, multifaceted beings who, just like us, want to be happy and not suffer. Okay, so take your most unfavorite politician and try this out. And this is why I think it's good to think of that person as a baby, because it makes us change our habitual thoughts about them. Yeah. Okay, so here's a reflection called Compassionate Understanding of Others. So bring to mind an image of someone for whom you'd like to cultivate compassion. Okay, so think of somebody. This can be someone to whom you feel close, someone you don't know very well, or someone you don't like or towards whom you feel other powerful emotions. Got somebody? Now, picturing this person in your mind, remind yourself that just like you, she or he just wants to be happy and not suffer. Allow yourself to be aware that he or she has a life that extends far beyond your experience of them. A story that runs just as deep as yours, filled with hopes and dreams, fears and struggles. And then picture them going through their life cycle. So start, imagining them as a newborn, born into a confusing world they don't understand. As a toddler, learning to move about the world on their own. Okay, then think of them as a child, making friends, experiencing rejection, entering school. Then think of them as an adolescent, struggling to define themselves. Think of them as a young adult striving to make their place in the world. Moving through adulthood, establishing priorities, settling into a rhythm of life, experiencing successes and upheavals, and moving on. Then think of them as an elder, observing their physical strength beginning to fade even as their wisdom grows. Then imagine them on their deathbed, looking back on their life and closing their eyes. At each of these points, imagine what this person might have faced and felt. The excitement of exploration and success, the pain of rejection and falling short. Perhaps loved ones surround them, perhaps they are alone. Imagine his or her life filled with aspirations and experiences, successes and regrets. Imagine this beautiful person who, just like you, only wants to be happy and not suffer. Allow yourself to be filled with the kind wish that he or she may have a life filled with happiness and peace, that her or his life may be free from suffering and its causes. Okay. So we have a few minutes remaining for questions. I went through that rather quickly. Sometimes it helps us to focus if we have to do it quickly, but it's something that you may want to go through again and take it a little bit more slowly. Yeah? Okay, questions, comments? Yeah.
There can be also a reaction. We had here at the Abbey once a woman, she was from Germany, and she took anagarika ordination just for a couple of months and then left. So she told me she had extreme reactions to her appearance, having no hair, and then this blue dress. It reminded her about the Jews in the Nazi camps. She felt like she is, I believe, from Jewish background. So it was like a horror for her, looking at the mirror every time and seeing her that way, and then also losing a little bit of weight because of the training. And so also in that way, people can react to environments and appearances on their own.
Yeah. Good example. Sad example. Mm-hmm.
I don't think I fully understood your reference to the story from the sutra about the Buddha saying, or like how the monk saying, doesn't make any sense for that other monk to be analyzing his dream in that way because no such real woman existed. Whereas even if that woman didn't exist, isn't it still good that he was going through applying antidotes? I'm not quite getting the full impact of
why are you talking about, if you're attracted to somebody, let's say you're attracted to them and you want to stay attracted and you start talking about their fantastic qualities, but there's no person there, then what are you doing? What are you doing? You're talking about, it's kind of like watching a movie and finding a character in a movie, and you like the character in the movie, and you think, wow, I really want to meet that person. They're so cool. But they're just a character in the movie. The actor is not that person, and the character in the movie does not exist. And yet you're going, oh, I really want to meet them. I think I've fallen in love with them. They're so wonderful. Isn't that rather silly? Basically it's like, it's like having a daydream, and you get so involved in your daydream that you think it's real, and there's nothing there. So what are you spending all your time doing? So in this case, in the sutra, they weren't elaborating on the good qualities of the daydream. It involved a monk who had a precept to stay celibate. So what do the monks usually do when they see somebody who's attractive? They think about the foulness of the body. We think of the foulness of the body too, And so there's this guy, he dreamed about a beautiful woman, and he's thinking about the foulness of her body, but she doesn't have a body. And there's no such woman there. Okay? So the analogy is like when we grasp somebody as inherently existent, even that there might be what in the world we say a real person, but we see an inherently existent person, and then we start elaborating on their good qualities and fall in love with them, or we're attracted to them and we start then thinking about their weaknesses and their faults. Why not go directly to the point, which is there's no inherently existent person there to start with? There's nobody who has a foul body there, because you're thinking of an inherently existent person, and there's no inherently existent person there. Okay? So I didn't explain how the analogy works, but that's what the purpose of it is. Okay? Yeah. So when our understanding of emptiness is not very strong, then we use the other things and, the foulness of the body and so on and so forth. But if our understanding is emptiness is strong, it's much better. It's just, there's no inherently existent person there. So who am I creating this fantasy about to start with? Yeah. Just like, there's no dream person there. Yeah. So who am I falling in love with, and whose body do I now need to see as foul? There's nobody there. It's a dream. They disappeared as soon as I woke up. Okay? Yeah.
Questions online. So someone is asking, isn't it okay that we have the right to feel the depth of a situation, like to feel bad about a situation so that we can move on? But what do we do when other people are expecting so much from us that they're not giving us the room to actually feel bad or feel the depth of the situation?
Okay, so they're asking me if what is okay.
Well, regarding having a pity party or having the right to feel completely the depth of a situation, how can we do that even though other people might not be wanting to give us that room?
Okay, let me just back up here. I don't think it's a right. I don't think we need to bring in, it's my right. It's like, this is just what I want to do. Okay? Or this is where I'm at. I'm feeling the depth of the situation. Don't bring in, it's my right and you're taking my rights away from me, because that's just going to complicate the situation. It's like, this is what I want to do. And, and I'm feeling the depths of the thing. And other people are saying things like, get over it. Yeah, get over it. It's not a big deal. You're exaggerating the situation. Snap out of it. Okay. And we're stuck in, but you don't understand the depth of my emotion. Okay. Now, I'm making fun of this, okay? And the other person may not like that. But the reason I'm making fun of it is because I'm one of those people who, me and you, okay, who my emotions are so important. And I've got to feel my emotions. And then we get totally tangled up in our emotions and analyze a situation in and out and in and out to figure out every little detail of everything that happened in the situation. So this may not be what is going on with the person who asked the question. So please don't get offended at my making fun of it. I'm making fun of myself. But in looking out at the audience, I'm seeing some people nodding their heads in agreement that maybe they have the same kind of mechanism functioning in them. Yeah. And that it can be sometimes, I found it personally myself, very helpful to say to myself sometimes, not all the time, relax. It's only an emotion. It's not the biggest thing in the universe. It comes, it goes. It may be based on a correct understanding. It may not be. I may never understand the situation completely. But let's just relax here, okay? So, yeah. Okay, so that's part of my response. So, yeah, don't get mad at me. I'm talking about myself. Because I don't want anybody to get mad at me, because then I'm going to cry and feel neglected, and oh, my feelings are so terrible. Okay. Now, the other part of the question, which I think is, what to do when other people are telling you, look, this is no big deal and just get over it and snap out of it, and what are you, making such a big thing about it, okay? So when you are powerfully experiencing an emotion, somebody saying that to you does not help. Okay? So if you're the kind of person who wants to give advice instead of wants to listen, recognize that giving advice is going to bring one response, and just listening and offering some empathy to the other person will bring another response. If you're the person who wants that other person to be empathetic and not give advice, and now you're getting mad about them because they're giving advice, and that compounds your own grief at not being able to fully experience your own depth of your own emotion. So now you're getting even more wound up because you have the original emotion and now nobody understands me. Okay. Yeah, oh, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads here. You know, then, okay, it depends where you are in your practice, okay? If you are just beginning to practice and you don't have a lot of experience dealing with your emotions, then just, recognize this is where I'm at. That person's giving me advice, whereas I want them to listen to me. Let's have some compassion for them, because why are they giving me advice? They mean well, and probably my display of emotion is scary to them. And they don't deal with their own emotions that way. So they feel very ill at ease and helpless in the face of my emotion. And that's why they're giving me advice. So I don't need to judge them, and I don't need to follow their advice. I can just recognize what they're doing, leave them alone, grab my box of tissues, go in the bedroom and cry. Or, what is it? You beat you have what do the boxers do? A punching bag. You go beat your punching bag, you go jogging, you do what you need to do, to relax your mind, okay? But you have some understanding about what the other person's doing, and you realize that you don't need to do what they're suggesting, because what they're suggesting is coming from their own needs, and it's not meeting what you need, meeting your need at that moment, okay? So that's what to do if you're, fairly new to practice. If you've had some years, and many years, I would say, of working with your mind, when somebody says to you, "Get over it, what are you making such a big deal out of this for?" You might stop and say, yeah, why am I making such a big deal about this? In other words, don't listen to the tone of voice the other person said it in. Don't hear the implicit message, which is, you better change quick. Just think about what they said. This is the kind of stuff that I'm going to put when I write that book about the words of my mother, because I heard this a lot as a kid, why are you making such a big deal about this? And actually, now I can look and say, she might have something there. Why am I making such a big deal about this? In the whole, what's happening to countless sentient beings right now, does, somebody insulting me really matter? Is it really such a big thing that I need to get so twisted about it? Yeah. Okay? So sometimes, you can take this stuff that initially I was like, don't say that to me. And say, maybe there's something true about it. What do you think? Can you do that? Because, sometimes we are so attached to our interpretation and our emotion. I am not giving this up for anything. I'm going to stay miserable and process what I'm feeling. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more. I am not saying repress your emotions. I am not saying that. And I am not saying tell yourself you're wrong and you're bad and you shouldn't feel that way. I'm not saying any of that. Okay? So this is kind of looking at the situation from the perspective of a practitioner, who might have other ways of looking at situations than common people do.
These are perfect examples of the cognitive dissonance that happens when we practice the Dharma. When it goes up against all of the conditioning, the previous karma, the mental habits, that when you start realizing, when the Dharma starts to challenge you, there's a disconnect in the beginning, like, this is how I've always thought, always felt, always experienced, and now the Dharma is telling me the exact opposite. And how we try to manipulate the Dharma to fit into the old paradigm, and it just doesn't work. But there's a lot of cognitive dissonance through the path to just get our minds turned around from the bigger, grosser, and then it gets even more subtle.
Yeah. So you really need some commitment to stay with it.
Lineup of questions online. On very different topics. Okay. So one question is that someone can see how seeing someone we dislike as a baby can soften our hearts. But is that really realistic? It seems that it's the same as the monk having the dream about the woman. It's not real.
So seeing the person we don't like as a baby. Actually, I think it is realistic. They aren't a baby right now, but they have been. And I think that seeing somebody through all these different parts of their life and seeing them and imagining them in different situations, it gives us a much broader view of who they are than this little cartoon figure that we've created out of one or two experiences we've had with them. Yeah. It really helps us to see, wow, they're a human being. Okay. So I think this is the kind of thing that if we do it, it really helps us make peace with our family members. Okay? And with our parents. If you really understand, imagine your parents as little kids growing up in whatever historical period they grew up in. My parents grew up during the Depression and the Second World War. Wow, that's really going to impact how they think and how they relate to things. You might have a parent who grew up during the Vietnam War or who fought in Vietnam. It's really important that you understand that person's experience because it affects who they are now. Or you may have, somebody a parent who fought in Iraq or in Afghanistan, or who had certain experiences due to their race or due to their religion or due to their socioeconomic class. And, the more we can understand our parents' experiences like this, the more we see them as real living beings, like he says, with hopes and dreams and successes and failures. And that enables us to relate to them with some empathy and compassion instead of, they're my parent, therefore they should be like this and they're always like that. And that's not, and then you come up with the conclusion, they're toxic. So they're toxic, therefore I'm not going to speak to them ever again. But they're a whole human being.
The person from the question before, that said that you made her feel better already, even though you were making fun and everything. So it was great. And someone else has asked, in the previous teaching on compassion, it is also an emotion. So would it go away as others do, or is it different? We want to cultivate.
Would what go away?
The compassion we cultivate. Is it going to go away like other emotions?
Oh, okay.
And because we want to cultivate compassion and not let it go away during meditation, right?
Right.
So
You mean you fear losing your compassion during your meditation or during your life? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The answer is that's where habituation comes in. Yeah, familiarization. It's not just generating compassion once and then saying, now I have it. It's something that we cultivate over a period of time, because if we don't continue cultivating it, it will backslip if old habits, of anger and resentment come forth. So we really have to cultivate these good these good emotions consistently over time. Okay? And with that, our time is up.